So when you think of video game movies, chances are you think of the extremes. You think about absolute box office jokes that get mocked for as long as they aren't forgotten, like the Mario movie. Or at best, you think of fan service roller coasters that are mainly there to stoke the existing fans of whatever property it is the studio sunk its teeth into, like the Mario movie. For as long as these things have been around, you'd think by now they'd have cleared the massive stigma up and made some adaptation that gets pretty agreeable press. Video games based on movies come out all the time, and they're usually pretty... Moving on. So what's a big animation black hole like Disney to do when the wild itch squirms up their backs? Well, they respected it. Yeah, shocks me too. Now, obviously, Disney's got a little too many 10-year-olds on the line to make the fifth movie where the video games go crazy and come to life and kill people, rah! So instead, they just made the people kill the video games. And the video games kill the video games. When you think video game movie, do you leap to the conclusion? Yes, a duo-bonding sports tale about a cartoon villain undergoing a midlife crisis, a Mario clone fawning over a gender-bent Master Chief, and a disability allegory taking the form of a shrill-voiced Japanese Nendoroid? Well, you should. I remember seeing an ad for this film on a subway back at Disneyland or some such. The movie came out all the way back in 2012. Wow, Ralph says that being retro is like being old but cool. In 10 years, that's pretty retro. Do people even live that long? Despite being an ancient relic from a forgotten age of humanity, the film's held up surprisingly well. Normally, covering a topic like this that's ever so rich in brand recognition, a director looking only for the cash would just toss big-name games in every scene, make the cast run around different properties, and call it a day. Your butt's in the seat, your money's in theirs, and you're not going to give them a bad review for at least an hour and a half. But even as a kid, I could see that Wreck-It Ralph was the cooler kid among a sea of fellow kid execs. It's all just part of the flow, yeah? Emoji movie, food movie, Lego movie. Wait, no, that one was actually good. So how and why did they even try with this one, where they already had pretty much every arcade-era brand under their shirt? I'll tell you why. I don't know, but I can tell you how they did it. Among a ceaseless expanse of point-and-recognize hour-long commercials and out-of-touch coat of paint disappointments, this movie about video games not only failed to not be about a movie, but it also failed to not be about video games. So let's give a brief spoiler-heavy breakdown of the plot. What, you wanted me to do a break pun? You think I am some kind of clown? The film follows its titular Big Hands Hans, who live in an arcade game with Hammer Brother Jr. Big Man is the bad man, so no one in this gameverse likes him, even when they are not stuck being the puppets of their unholy overlords. When Hansy gets told that they'll respect him if he brings back something distracting and shiny, he goes to Call of Duty, where Samus Aran lives. Hey, that ain't right. Long story short, Big Dude messes up the segregated arcade multiverse and winds up in Mrs. Mario Kart, where he becomes the big brother figure to a talking lint roller. With that set up, the film's ready to tell a grand tale all across the arcade, and by that I mean, the opening takes place in the game Ralph and Felix are from, a couple minutes are spent in the generic shooter world, and then the rest of the movie is pretty much just shackled to just Candyland. I'd be remiss to not say that this decision may have irked the folks who came here to watch the characters play anywhere else, but it's important to get that initial jab out of the way to look at this film more objectively. I could bring back up another low-bar example of a film with a similar setup where characters are hopping between digital zones based on the real-life technology that the kids are with, but the only brand world that's ever visited once is Pac-Man's, and it's just as good as a visual gag for a single scene after a totally unrelated intro sequence where we learned a lot about Ralph's character. Every existing video game cameo is, well, just a cameo. You'll probably find a new property or character reference in the background of every scene inside the main arcade search terminal every time you rewatch. It was only on a viewing I did a couple years back where I realized a couple pieces of graffiti referenced Zero Wing and Final Fantasy VII. It doesn't even make sense for the story, it's just there. That's the kind of thing that makes you know they did their research, making everything in this movie function like a love letter to the industry, but like a platonic love letter, except with less of the disappointment. The character designs for all these random NPCs sprinkled through the film, the nonsense stuff like unused levels and the Konami code and Let Wax Euthanize Nana, wait what, are the key elements that serve to bolster the experience for people who know a little more than the film needed you to know going in. That's part of a bigger factor as to why I love this movie so much. Wreck-It Ralph treats the audience with intelligence. The only lowbrow humor that the film tosses at you early on, from the perspective of an actual child's humor no less, ends up becoming a key bonding aspect between Ralph and Vanellope, strange enough as it is to say. And what I'm getting at isn't that the film has raunchy adult euphemisms every 2 minutes, best you'll get is Calhoun dodging a swear every now and again, but that this is one of those nice little Disney or Pixar films from the early times where it really felt like every age of person was meant to be able to watch it. Let me give you a couple examples as to how highly this movie thinks of its audience. First, big one here, King Candy. Can of gummy worms in itself, twist villains. Disney's gotten a lot of flack for putting twist baddies in pretty much their whole 2010s output for a while, till they ended up abandoning villains altogether. But the twist around King Candy is probably the most smartly and excellently executed twist in film I've ever seen, and that's no witty exaggeration for comedic effect, mister. Right at the start of the film, the other bad guys angrily accuse Ralph of thinking of going turbo when he says he wants to change his role. No one in the audience knew what this meant going in unless they'd already seen it, but you pretty much get all the info you need right there. The film doesn't sit you down with a hot mug of Ralph's least favorite flavor to teach you the ins and outs of each new world-building piece it thought up. It just puts it plain and easy for you to see, and when the characters interact with it, you're expected to get it, and it's framed so well that you just do. The only two times I can think of where a character had to be ignorant to know a core piece of information central to the plot are when Vanellope tells Ralph that a glitch can't leave its game, and when, back on topic, Felix tells the newly plugged-in Calhoun that going turbo comes from a racing protagonist named Turbo, who invaded a new, more popular game and got them both shut down. I'm electing to ignore the part where Calhoun chews out Felix for not knowing what her own game's monsters are because that line was stupid and not important. You can even see Turbo's game in the opening fast forward disappearing as Ralph says that it's sad how many games come and go, but it isn't even framed in such a way that you can't miss it. And then meeting King Candy himself, you pretty much assume you know his whole story right away anyway. He seemingly has a perfectly sound reason to be a foil for Vanellope. He doesn't want her glitch nature to cause the game to get unplugged, especially since Vanellope would go down with it. That sounds plausible, and you have no reason to assume that the jealous racer Turbo is still alive, since as far as the audience is concerned, his purpose to the story is fulfilled as soon as he set the precedent for going turbo. These two characters seem to have perfectly sound motivations distinct of one another, and yet the film sets up doubt in King Candy in ways that subtly hint towards something being wrong. The movie could have had a moment after he tricks Ralph where he looks at the camera and makes an evil face and giggles maniacally to slam the sentiment over the head of every nearby baby, but nope, they only show him being a little off. His odd giggling, his hidden anger issues, his power to edit the code especially, makes him seem a little odd, but then boom, big reveal near the end, they're the same guy. That revelation completely recontextualizes everything that you've seen King Candy do, but you already know his true motives now, just from that innocuous flashback spiel from earlier on. It's an absolutely ingenious plot development that excels at being delightfully unexpected and perfectly understandable. And for another example of how mature the movie can feel, man, this film is not scared to make its audience feel horrible. The most professional source of all is personal experience, and I could not watch the scene where Ralph breaks Vanellope's cart. A friend of mine bawled so much as a kid that her dad had to escort her out. The music, voice direction, and sentiment we have to the situation superbly tugs at the heartstrings. The film barely even spends time joking, it just wants to make you care about the characters. I'll admit Calhoun's characterization was a little bit weaker than the rest of the cast, but the film doesn't stray away from slowing down a bit to let emotions hit without breaking the pace, especially in the scene where Ralph gets the penthouse all to himself, but is still alone. Before I move on to the big points of my review, I wanted to note a few nitpicks I had with the film, just to prove I'm not wearing glasses with too much rose tint. The opening sequence has a few too many back-to-back contrivances, be it the hero's duty soldier that tells Ralph everything he needed to know to progress the plot, Ralph telling Hubert what he's doing despite it jeopardizing his entire plan, the medallion even working for Sugar Rush's racing election system at all, stuff like that. It'll take you out of the flow a little bit if you think too hard, and Calhoun specifically having been programmed with her backstory is certainly a confusing notion, and it's hard to take it fully seriously when it's framed the way it was. I think that could have been part of the point, but the backstory still kind of drives the drama behind the B-plot characters, so I don't know. If you're watching this movie, you're watching it for the really strong core character growth, not particularly because of numerous jokes or watertight storytelling. So before I rewatch this movie right before making this, Pass Me wrote a few questions down for Now Me to answer. Not that I hadn't seen the film a few times before, but just for me to make sure I keep in mind as I rewatch with a critical, professional, fun-lacking eye. First up, how well have the core characters developed? Just as I remembered, maybe even a little better, the main friendship between Ralph and Vanellope is incredible. The way they work off each other, going from rivals to friends after a series of strong character moments between the two, and demonstrating the mentor figure nature of Ralph in such a way that brings Vanellope around to him, is really compelling. There are a good number of moments that just force you to awe at it. Felix and Calhoun do not get a lot of screen time, but their dynamic is pretty strong too. Between the two plot pairs, the boys in the group are subject to a lot of unmediated slapstick, which works better in some places than others, but despite the excessive use of it, I don't think it was bad enough to warrant the character relationships to be lesser as a result. Felix and Calhoun have a generic split up and get back together moment that isn't really addressed, but it does let Ralph and Felix have a good moment together, so take from that moment what you will. I especially like how the resolution of Vanellope's arc doesn't make her overcome her disability, but embrace it. That's a pretty good message you wouldn't expect modern Disney to get right. I think out of all the characters, the one who learns the least is Felix, but he's kinda meant to be a guiding light for Ralph and Calhoun anyway, so I don't think that's a very big flaw. He does learn a little bit more about Ralph in the prison cell scene, but it doesn't go too far. Overall, the film puts most of its stake in the core duo, but the B-plot guys are still really lovable. How faithful is this film to its inspiration? A lot of this film ensures that it stays true enough to the ways arcade games operate without sacrificing the creative elements of its wacky story setup. Sometimes the movie pushes the bounds of its internal logic. Say, Ralph throwing a medal at the arcade screen causes the tape on the outside to weaken, but that's not really what I'm looking to even answer in this query, really. The people behind this movie clearly did their research and know how these kinds of things work, and they absolutely nail the aesthetics behind every element of the film. Hell, they made a Japanese band sing a Japanese song for Sugar Rush's theme just because the game is so clearly inspired by Japanese game tropes, and furthermore, they made a whole theme for the Fix-It Felix Jr. arcade game, which only plays as the third song in the credit reel. The folks behind this movie were clearly working off of inspiration, not trends. How well does the movie's internal logic hold up? Alright, here's where I address some of the things like that medal earlier. A lot of core aspects of this film's world do kind of buckle down on top of each other. You could ask, how did someone at Tappers get the Konami code? Why does that give any video game character access to the simplified code network? Why does the code network have details related to artificial intelligence that's been granted to these video game characters? How in the what the diddly darn does Vanellope's glitch even make a modicum of in-universe sense? How much free will is a game character like Vanellope supposed to even have about her identity? Stuff like that. Watching this film does require you to suspend your disbelief here and there. The biggest offender has to be the core monster threat of the film, the cybugs. Nearly everything they do is kind of bizarre. They're used in a simile to be compared to a virus, but then later Turbo just kind of fuses into one somehow just to have a big monster form that can safely die on screen. And he says that he is a virus now, and just, wow, cybugs are kind of busted. If they ever make a Wreck-It Ralph remastered, devs, please nerf. What is there for kids to enjoy? For the most part, a kid can enjoy this movie to its fullest. It's a really fun movie that never lets itself get boring. The action scenes are fun, and the core premise is something that most kids are probably quite on board with. I would dare say the kids are intelligent enough to get hooked onto the really well-written character arcs here. I know as a kid I was personally, but I've also been a writing nerd since forever, so I can't be super sure what other kids thought. What is there for adults to enjoy? Aside from the core character moments and retro video game nods, most modern single digits aren't going to get, and not watching this movie is mainly going to want to do it just to have a feel-good film to relax with. Wreck-It Ralph doesn't spend a lot of time trying to make you laugh, it just spends time trying to make you care. How well does the movie conclude its plot points? Pretty much everything in the film that gets introduced has some relevance to the overall story, Chekhov's gun principle and all, and it all wraps itself nicely at the end. Even things you wouldn't expect to be resolved, like Hubert's cast needing a home, gets some sort of closure by the end. The relationship between Felix and Calhoun was a little fast-paced if I had to point out one plot point that wasn't done as well as it could have been, but this ending leaves you and the characters pretty satisfied. How well does the film deliver its ideas? Ultimately, this film has a few core messages. The first, a subtle nod towards disabilities with Vanellope's glitch. The film kinda breaks its world a little bit to tell the story, but hey, at the time it was not really an often seen topic, and the glitch is still an up-in-the-air defect that it could stand in for just about anything. Therein lies a little bit of dissociation with real disabilities, but still, the movie treats it with reverence. The Sugar Rush kids were a little unrealistic in the way that they bullied her about it, but children are also awful in crowds, so maybe it was accurate after all. Another core message embodied by Ralph is to overcome your labels. Now, it's a little difficult to find a real-world allegory for Ralph's role as the bad guy, and the struggles he faces to overcome it, but the film itself even has a zombie at the start telling him that his labels won't make him happy. It has to come from inside. That's the message Ralph and the audience get as he tutors Vanellope. The medal he gets from breaking into Call of Duty is shiny, but impersonal. The holographic commander's words ring untrue, which is exemplified by comic antics on screen. Yet when Ralph simply offers Vanellope his support and becomes her first friend, she makes her own shabby medal, which ultimately has 5 times the impact on Ralph than his golden one ever had. But surprisingly, and probably unintentionally, a good number of this film's plot points are about mortality and acceptance. Look at Turbo, man. For as much as he was committing game terrorism, Guy's only other alternative was accepting his mortality by the point he evaded Sugar Rush. Ralph, too, has to accept his role in life, as he cannot change it. Just as the Turbo-tastic man must accept his mortality, so too must one accept the mortality of this script, which is about to get unplugged as well. Wreck-It Ralph has a powerful core character set with a well-established and healthy relationship. It doesn't rely on cheap brand names, has a clear passion and thought put into its world, tells meaningful messages, and builds on core foundations without wrecking anything beneath it. The core character growth is compelling enough that someone of any age can sit down and feel good watching this film.
But isn't all that stuff you just listed like the inverse of the problems with the sequel?
I'm glad I scripted you to ask, little guy. No Tenchi cars were harmed during the production of this video, only before and after. Good night, everybody.